After looking at neuroscience, at psychiatry, neurology, the brain, the study of human behavior, I came to the conclusion that consciousness is the most important aspect of our life, and developing consciousness is the most powerful and important aspect in fulfilling the purpose of life. So the book has these pillars. I describe in the book 4 pillars of the logic of what we are doing in the book. One is reasoning, rational, logical thinking. So the second pillar is what I call empirical findings. Does it influence their physiology, their behavior, their mental capacities? Does it influence society as a whole when you develop consciousness? So there is the logic, there is the empirical, scientific research level. And then there is another pillar, which is important because you might have something and discover something, but has no practical effects and no practical reason. Does it improve our existence? Does it improve our well-being, our sense of fulfillment, our sense of accomplishing our desires, etc., and our fulfillment of the meaning of why we are here? So that's the third pillar. The fourth pillar is another level of consideration, which is parsimony, which means simplicity of the paradigm, simplicity of the logic. Because you can have something very complicated with many exceptions and this and that. And, you're asked a question, this is a mystery, but maybe there is some angel that does this and it is a supernatural power and like that. When it gets to that level, scientists shy away from the logic that you are presenting. So the paradigm I present in this book, Consciousness is All There Is, has all these 4 pillars very strong. To me, it's extremely logical and reasonable. It makes sense. It doesn't contradict.
Okay, I'm joined here with Dr. Tony Nader. Now, to get started, in another conversation, I heard you speak about Abraham Maslow's paradigm of self-transcendence. And the whole idea here is that we sort of need to move through a hierarchy of needs. And at the top of these needs is transcendence. But before we can get to transcendence, we sort of need to cover these more basic needs first. But what I heard you say, which I find really interesting, was that we should transcend first. And I was just curious, could you maybe expand on that a little bit? Because I think this is a really important point.
Yeah, thank you for starting on that level. This is beautiful perspective of what transcendence is, what it gives us. When Maslow described these points, he felt that an individual has to arrange their personal needs, as you say, and then there are basic needs of survival, then community, family, etc. And then the perspective grows and the imagination grows. And ultimately, one has to go beyond and transcend the smaller self and go to include other factors in our considerations of environment, of life, of the future, and think of higher values. And this transcendence is transcending the small aspect of one's needs and demands on a daily basis. However, in order to meet one's demands on a daily basis, even the most basic demands of food and shelter and decision making about life, etc., one uses a certain amount of one's potential. What we have seen scientifically is that one can literally improve one's potential, one's clarity of thinking, one's ability to make decisions by developing inner values and inner clarity. And this happens through a technology of consciousness, which we call Transcendental Meditation, that allows us for a few minutes morning and evening to settle the mind down, remove the stresses and strains, and wake up to a reality where we are more conscious, more aware. We have broad comprehension. And even just this simple technique of few minutes morning and evening can allow the individual to be more resilient, to be more creative, and therefore to start achieving and accomplishing the needs that are described in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so, if we first improve ourselves, then we can do much better on the outside. So, that is why I feel transcending inside, which means going beyond the surface values of the mind. And there is a technique which is very simple for that. It's like you tell somebody, oh, you have to work in order to get food and all of that. So why are you sleeping? You shouldn't sleep because sleep is making you waste time and sleep is not a priority. That, of course, is ridiculous and counterproductive because you have to sleep in order to be able to function. You need rest so that you have energy and dynamism. So if you can access a deeper level of rest, a greater level of clarity, where your stresses, your fears are removed, then that becomes a very essential aspect of one's rhythm of life so that one can achieve any of the other goals on the hierarchy of needs and desires and feelings, etc.
I think it's a very, very important point, and it's kind of countercultural to say. It could even be a future book. The title could be "Transcend First," you know,
Yeah,
just
a
think it out
nice
loud.
idea. I'll think about that.
But okay, so your your latest book is "Consciousness is All There Is." So to get started, is this something that is at this stage an intellectual understanding for you, Dr. Nader, or is this something that you feel deeply? And if it's the latter, if it's something that you feel on a deep level, how has this impacted your day to day experience of life?
Is something that I feel deeply and something that has come through my what I would call lifetime of search into what is reality, where we come from, how we can handle it, what's the purpose of life, where we're going, and how we can make it better. And after looking at neuroscience, at psychiatry, neurology, the brain, the study of human behavior, I came to the conclusion that consciousness is the most important aspect of our life, and developing consciousness is the most powerful and important aspect in fulfilling the purpose of life. So the book has these pillars. I describe in the book 4 pillars of the logic of what we are doing in the book. One is reasoning, rational, logical thinking. And that is something that's based on common sense and logical inference and deductions and analysis of whatever we know about the universe, whatever we know about ourselves, and how we can, knowing all of this, come to a conclusion from a rational perspective. But rational perspective in science is not always enough. Things can make sense, but they prove not to work or they are not realistically applicable. So the second pillar is what I call empirical findings, empirical research, empirical data. And empirical data means put your theory or your paradigm to test. So test it in the lab, test it with people. Do you see that consciousness actually influence people really? Does it make their life better? Does it influence their physiology, their behavior, their mental capacities? Does it influence society as a whole when you develop consciousness? And so that is the second pillar, which is very important and which I describe in the book in how many ways and how much research has been done to actually support the paradigm. So there is the logic, there is the empirical scientific research level. And then there is another pillar, which is important because you might have something and discover something, but has no practical effects and no practical reason. And so it's practicality. Does it make sense? Does it help us in our life? Does it improve improve our existence? Does it improve our well-being, our sense of fulfillment, our sense of accomplishing our desires, etc., and our fulfillment of the meaning of why we are here? So that's the third pillar. The fourth pillar is another level of consideration, which is parsimony, which means simplicity of the paradigm, simplicity of the logic. Because you can have something very complicated with many exceptions and this and that. And, you're asked a question, this is a mystery, but maybe there is some angel that does this and it is a supernatural power and like that. When it gets to that level, scientists shy away from the logic that you are presenting. So the paradigm I present in this book, Consciousness is All There Is, has all these four pillars very strong. To me, it's extremely logical and reasonable. It makes sense. It doesn't contradict what we know about the world today, what we have discovered in science. To the contrary, it's supported by that. It has strong empirical scientific data that shows that consciousness really can make your life better. And it's very practical because people have less disease. There is less accidents of the roads when a community is meditating. There is less infant mortality, less drug use, less, etc. All of these very, very strong positive values. And it's extremely simple. It's the simplest thing you can ever imagine because all it says is there is one field of consciousness, and that is all that there is. And since we know we have consciousness, it's not contradicting anything, because without consciousness, there is nothing for us. If you are in coma or in deep anesthesia, although these are some minor states of consciousness also, but that's a different discussion. But just to have a feeling of it, if one is in anesthesia, what does it matter to be most loved or most praised or to have wealth and knowledge? You don't experience it, you don't live it, you are inexistent in a sense for yourself if you don't have consciousness. And so consciousness is a very simple thing that we know exists for sure. Without consciousness, all the rest of the universe, we cannot assure ourselves that it exists. So it's a very simple paradigm. The challenge is how from this field of consciousness, the whole universe appears. And that is what I deal with in this book, but on a very, very simple step-wise of logic, with no crazy exceptions or supernatural things, etc.
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about this recently. And the thing that really, whenever you think about this idea of materialism and physicalism, the idea that a mindless universe produced mindful beings capable of subjectivity and having subjective experiences is really difficult to sort of comprehend. Like, if we have this capacity for subjectivity and we came out of this world, then surely that is the nature of the world itself. But I want to go back to and underline something you said quite casually at the start there that I think is a huge thing. You said something along the lines of, this can provide a sense of purpose in life, in that our purpose can be thought around the lines of deepening our consciousness or deepening consciousness. Could you maybe expand on that a little bit, Dr. Nader?
Yeah, in order to understand purpose, you have to know how something is made and why it is made as it is. What's the purpose of having a car? It's to travel more comfortably. A plane makes you travel faster and further. So you create these objects that allow you to do this. And so why we are here, why do we have a physiology? Where are we going? And if it's something that is simply the product of uh, trial and error by itself without any ultimate purpose, then the whole thing has no real meaning. And it so happened to be there. But we all have an inner sense and intuition that there is some meaning, there is a reason why we exist. We also know that there are laws of nature which are very strict and which are very systematic. So you can predict something if you have all the knowledge of the cause, then you can see what the effect is, at least on the classical level of existence. So there are many reasons why it cannot be that we are in a totally haphazard universe. And so we look for purpose, and we have to define our purpose based on what our paradigm of existence is. Which means if everything is material and physical, as you mentioned, then is this a creation which is different from consciousness, that has a disconnect with consciousness itself? Or is it a phenomenon within consciousness, a phenomenon of consciousness itself, looking at itself and experiencing itself from different perspectives? The paradigm I present is a paradigm which is called idealism by certain people, but it doesn't matter the philosophical term. It just postulates that there is a primary ocean, which is consciousness. And now we ask the question, okay, there is an ocean of consciousness. So the simple question is, what is its nature? What does it do? And the answer is that it is conscious. That's all. So that's why we're calling it consciousness. Now, to be consciousness means to be conscious, which is its nature, is to know itself, to know something. And if this field is one unbounded field of pure being, just pure consciousness, there is nothing else to know but itself. However, when it looks at itself, it finds that it can look at itself from an infinite number of possibilities, infinite number of ways. And so this is how emerges within it, within this unmanifest virtual field of being, an infinite number of possibilities. See, people say, what does it mean? How does it mean? I usually take an example, which is kind of a metaphor, but which helps us to figure out. See, if you have an actor, or before the actor, let's say you have an author, and an author wants to write a fiction book. And based on their imagination from their consciousness, they create characters and beings or whatever, extraordinary situations. And, you can go as far as imagination is capable of going. So based on this human consciousness, you invent imaginary entities or imaginary beings or imaginary people, imaginary circumstances, etc. And this is the play of consciousness within itself, looking at itself and imagining all different kinds of possibilities. So this is a human consciousness, which is not necessarily the most expanded consciousness, except if one is in a very high state of consciousness. That's another topic also, which we discuss in the book, which is the different states of consciousness. So say normal waking state of consciousness and a normal author creating figures and creating images and possibilities. Now, if you say that there is an unbounded ocean of consciousness, and you can see that imagination within that field depends on how big is consciousness. And if that consciousness is practically unlimited, so the imagination of consciousness itself is unlimited. So as we imagine ourselves that we have the possibility to create, to think of different characters, etc., that field looks at itself and imagines all infinite number of possibilities of being, infinite number of ways of looking at itself. So to make a long story short, we just take this as this step. In the book, I describe a little more systematically how this happens. We call it a cascade of from wholeness to smaller and smaller values, etc. In any case, you have that field, but everything is still unmanifest, non-manifest, which means virtual. So what I'm saying in other terms is we have a field which is a pure field of quiet consciousness. It is one field, it's not many, but it have within it infinite number of possibilities of being. They are only possibilities. It's again like the author, it's one author, but the author has maybe 100 ideas of possibilities. It doesn't mean that the author is many people or the author has become suddenly all of these people or all of these situations. It's just in the imagination. So that is the field, and it has all of these possibilities within it. Now, what is the nature again of that field? The nature of that field is to know, to be conscious, right? It's not an exception. We said to be conscious. Now, in that field, it is conscious of all the possibilities. What it does not know is what it is like to actually be one of those possibilities, because it imagines them from its own broad, unlimited perspective, but it doesn't know what it is like to see things from a limited perspective. Limited perspective may be my limited perspective, or a cat's limited perspective, or a tree's limited perspective, or whatever kind of perspective one can have. So there are all of these perspectives. Because when you look at things, every individual looks at reality from their own perspective. And we all know that we have our own vision of the universe, our own needs, our own desires, our own histories. And these create for us a certain perspective. When you go out, you look at things, you expect things from your own personal vision and imagination based on your qualities and capacities, but also on your limitations, how limited you are in your awareness. Because if you could see the unified field and see quantum field and quantum mechanics and understand the whole universe, then you have a certain perspective. If you are only limited and you are stressed usually and your brain is limited in its perspective, you're thinking of only one thing which scares you or you are worried about, and then you have funnel vision and tunnel vision and like that, then you see only one thing. And even things that people might be doing nicely to you, you see them in the wrong way because you are afraid or because you're worried and because your consciousness has been narrowed and limited. So all of these perspectives are limited perspectives. That's what I call limited perspective. So to go back, that ocean of consciousness, the primary ocean of consciousness, imagines all these things, but it doesn't know what it is like to be every one of them. So again, to make a long story short, manifestation, or what people usually like to call creation. So the manifestation, the world of manifest objects that are limited in their scope in time and space, are just that. The ability of that ocean of consciousness to forget itself as being unbounded and to put itself in the shoes of individual limited perspectives. It's very, very simple. And then that has to grow in order to reach a higher and higher perspective until the realization of the unlimited perspective is back again on track. Which means we as human beings, we have quite a broad comprehension. We have quite an amazing consciousness. It is much more than animal consciousness, than plant consciousness, than mineral consciousness, of course, which again is a story of evolution of consciousness. So there is a path from very limited perspective, very limited consciousness, to, we can say even from particles to molecules to cells to organs, to organ systems, and then to complex nervous system and a human being that then has broader and broader and broader awareness and broader consciousness. So the whole purpose of manifestation and life is to experience from limited perspectives, but keep growing towards finding the truth, the ultimate truth, and the ultimate consciousness, where you know that you are actually the ocean. So you go back to the self. That's what we call going back to the self. And that's what different traditions call enlightenment, self realization, liberation, etc. So the whole purpose of life is the expansion of consciousness. And that's why we all want to know more, we want to experience more, we want to even own more, because we think that when we own more, we are bigger, we have more management of greater things and greater possibilities. And so that explains the whole way we grow until we are what is called liberated, or we are liberated from limitations, and we have reached enlightenment, which is a state where we know who we truly are, and we know that everything is that infinite, unbounded reality. What happens is, as consciousness grows and expands, there is greater happiness because there is greater fulfillment. And so we can also say that the purpose of life is the expansion of happiness. It's really the same because the expansion of consciousness is automatically equated with the expansion of happiness.
Okay. There's so much in there. So if we say that the purpose of life is the expansion of consciousness, have you thought much about the relationship between truth and the expansion of consciousness? And I mean truth in the sense of the role that can play in an individual's life in helping them to expand consciousness and expand awareness.
Yeah, ultimate truth is that we are all that unified field of being, that field of consciousness. And that is the ultimate truth. And the thing is, we don't know it, and for a reason, because that ultimate actually being, truth, existence, pure existence, is experiencing through us what it is like to be myself or yourself or your friend or people or trees or whatever, is experiencing what is the ultimate reality. And so truth is very simple. Truth is that consciousness is all there is, and consciousness is going through the process of experiencing itself from different perspectives until every journey reaches its goal, which is to discover that indeed we are that infinite ocean of being.
Okay. Right. I'm going to read out a quote here, Dr. Nader, and I'd love to get your comments on it. So, this is from William Lane Craig. We all know that you can't really pull a rabbit out of a hat. When a magician claims to pull a rabbit out of the hat, we
Did
know
we
that
have
there
a
had to be a
freeze?
rabbit in the hat to begin with. Because you cannot get something out of nothing. You can't have nothing there and then all of a sudden a rabbit appears. If you start with matter from the Big Bang and all you do is rearrange it, according to the laws of chemistry and physics, you're not going to be able to get a conscious rabbit out of that material hat. You will end up with a very complicated hat, but there will not be a rabbit. The reason consciousness exists is because we started with a rabbit. That is a great big rabbit, namely God, who is himself conscious, and we do not have to pull a rabbit out of an empty hat and explain how you get consciousness from matter because there never was such a thing as just pure matter. God always existed. So, to the theist listening to this, and he would agree with your theory and be on board with it, but then he asks, where does this field come from? This field of consciousness, like, has this always just been there? And like, how would you respond to that question? And I know you could ask the exact same question of the the idea of a creator, but I'm just curious to get your perspective on that.
So the question is about beginning and ends, really, if I want to, it's a big, huge philosophical question, because you can always say, what was there before? Where did it come from? Where this thing comes from? And where does it end? Even it's in terms of space and time, where does time start? When does it end? And in terms of universe, where is the limit of the universe? You keep traveling. Do you reach somewhere where there is nothing after that? And that's an eternal, kind of almost eternal philosophical question. And the answer that I give in the book, in my point of view, is very simple. It's because consciousness is nothing material, nothing physical. We cannot ask something that is actually nothing in terms of physicality. When does it start? Because starting means there is a point of localization in time and space. But nothingness doesn't start anywhere and doesn't end anywhere. It's nothing. So from a perspective of consciousness, it is an unbounded field that has no sense of time and space, and actually in its own unbounded field. And it has time and space in the physical aspect of its manifestation. So when the universe kind of appears as a Big Bang, you can say, okay, it appears in time and space. But that feeling, that entity, that reality, if you call it an entity, and people can give it different names, but we're just calling it pure being, pure consciousness, is non-material, non-physical, and not part of space and time. So when you exit space and time, there is no more concept of starting and ending. It's eternal, it's always there. So when we see things from our own human perspective, who lives in time and space and see change in time and space, it can be hard to imagine when this time starts, when this space starts, when this any entity starts. But if we say nothing, if we think of nothing, you can never ask, where does nothing stop? Where does nothing start? It's nothing. It doesn't stop or start or anything. So this is how I address that point. It requires some kind of thinking about it. And I feel that one can come to the conclusion that, yes, I'm seeing things from a perspective of time and space, from a perspective of material things and energy and variations and all of that. And that's why it has to start somewhere. But when I see things from beyond time and space and from nothingness rather than somethingness on the surface or in the essence, then one can get convinced that, yeah, fine, it can be like that.
Interesting. Okay. And I suppose that reminds me a little bit of you talk about the Trinity in the book, and Augustine walking along the beach and then meeting the child. And I can't remember the exact metaphor, but I found that was a really interesting way to look at it. For someone listening to this, Dr. Nader, who maybe they are a physicalist and they're skeptical, what would you say to them if you had to pick, out of all the research you've done in your life and everything you've researched for this book, what would you say is the most compelling case that consciousness is all there is? Like, what's the strongest argument you feel is in favor of this view?
It's a convergence of factors, really. It's not just one argument. But if you want one argument, Descartes has given this kind of argument. And Descartes has asked himself, okay, when I am awake, the objects of daily living, they seem to be real. When I am sleeping and dreaming, the objects of my dream seem to be real. When I hallucinate, if I take a drug or I have some disease or something like that, it's my hallucinations that seem to be real. So he said, what is real? And he said, what if there is like some kind of devil or a magical individual that is actually making me believe that the things I see? Because look, when I dream, this is the dream that is real. So what makes sure that when I'm awake, it's not some other kind of a dream? Or when I hallucinate, I'm awake and I have my eyes open, but I see stuff and I see them differently. And there are many, many such factors, synesthesia, where people see colors in letters and all kinds of things that show that actually it's the brain interpreting whatever information comes to it from its own perspective. For example, we only see colors from red to violet. We don't see infrared. We don't see ultraviolet. And for us, they don't exist. Only that wavelengths of light exist. And so we don't hear certain sounds. We don't see X-ray. We don't, etc. So all of this tells us that it's a dynamics of our physiology, which is itself is consciousness, that actually sees things from a certain perspective. So Descartes says, then what makes me know that I am also real? Maybe I'm not real. That's when he said, I think, therefore I am. What he really meant is not just I think. What he really meant, I am conscious, therefore I exist. The fact that I am conscious is an assurance that I exist. And that is, I think, a very strong argument in terms of the importance and primacy of consciousness. Now, another aspect would be that without consciousness, nothing has any meaning. Another aspect would be that scientists have been searching for now recently, maybe 50 years of very profound research to find how is it that a mechanical brain can create consciousness, and they have absolutely no clue. We know that, if you see something, this is part of the brain gets excited. If you hear something, the other part, and there are combination of things that show how the brain works to produce the kind of experience that we have. But where does this subjective, personal, intimate experience of being, of existing, of the self, of love, of feeling, of hopes, of emotions, even of pain, even of looking at the redness of the red color and experiencing it as something very personal, these are all phenomena in consciousness that there is no explanation yet for how they happen. So ultimately, it comes to either you believe that consciousness is primary or matter is primary. And in both cases, you have to demonstrate how consciousness emerges. If you believe that matter or physicality is primary, you have to demonstrate how consciousness emerges. Or if you believe that consciousness is primary, you have to demonstrate how matter appears as it is, from where it comes, without introducing supernatural power that, oh, you don't understand, is mysterious, because that will never convince scientists.
For sure. And on this note about the idea of the brain producing consciousness, you give a really helpful metaphor, which I think really helped a penny to drop for me on this, in the book of a radio, and that a radio doesn't create music or produce music. Can you maybe tell us about this metaphor, Dr. Nader?
Yeah, it's a very interesting way. Every metaphor has its own limitation, but it helps us to imagine. And metaphors are very nice because complicated, sometimes topics or ideas are difficult to kind of figure out, but a metaphor helps us a lot. So the question is, you take the brain, you damage it, then consciousness or your ability to experience certain things is damaged. And people say this is the ultimate proof that actually the brain produces consciousness. Well, if you take a metaphor, like if you have a radio and the radio is picking up the waves from maybe the antenna or the cable or whatever, or a television picking up the image from a camera or from a cable or from a satellite, whatever. And then it produces it on a screen, or the radio plays the music. If you damage the television or you damage the radio, then you will have no music. And you conclude, okay, therefore the radio is the source of the music, which is, in a sense, okay. But no, the radio is not inventing the music, it's not creating the music. The radio is a transducer which picks up the waves from the satellite, from the cable, from the antenna, and then transforms it into another kind of wave. So from electromagnetic wave, you get now a sound wave, something reverberating, or a picture, also an electromagnetic wave, but of a different kind, on the television. And if you damage some part, and then you lose some aspect of the picture, or the quality of the picture, or the quality of the sound, like that, or you get some noise. And so our nervous system is also made of consciousness, because consciousness is all there is, but that is a little more demanding on the intellect to go through. We have to go through a lot of logic to accept that. But with this metaphor, we realize that at least the fact that when you damage something, you lose a certain functionality, doesn't mean that that thing is the original producer of that phenomenon that you are experiencing. So the radio is not the original producer of the music, but still, when you damage it, the music goes away. The brain is not just the creator of consciousness, but it has the ability to tune in like a radio and experience different kinds of consciousness. And if you damage it, then, if your radio doesn't listen to a certain wavelengths, and that particular, ability to detect, high wavelengths or short wavelengths goes away, it is because it has damaged that particular ability. And that is why consciousness and the way we experience reality depends on how our nervous system works. And if we expand our consciousness through, for example, transcendental meditation, which is a very simple, easy technique that anyone can practice sitting easily, comfortably in a chair, close the eyes, and you dive within yourself, and it creates high brainwave coherence and all the positive things that we have seen. Then you are actually using all the aspects of this radio, detecting the field from a more complete and holistic perspective, rather than just one wavelength of perspective and perception.
Wow, I really like that. I really like that. So, in this paradigm, what does this paradigm say around the question of free will? And if we do have it, what can be done to expand our freedom in the world?
Yeah, beautiful question. Again, I can tell you have been looking into the paradigm in the book. So people question freedom as if there is law of life, law in nature, then everything has to follow in a specific order. So how can you have freedom? But quantum mechanics and quantum field theory have discovered that it is not as much certain, everything is not as certain in its fundamental level as we imagined it would be. There are degrees of what we call uncertainty. And uncertainty is the basis of fluctuations, and at the beginning, and maybe just randomness. And then it gets more and more organized, but the degrees of freedom grow with greater complexity. Because if every little particle has a certain level and degree of potential randomness, then the group will have much more potential of randomness, if you like, in a sense. Now, that is just to support this with a logical, as we said, and empirical understanding about the universe, that it is possible that things are not as defined as classical physics says. And so there are probabilities which are there in the fundamental fabrics of nature. And which probability is going to manifest is still not known. That is why there is uncertainty. And there is the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. You cannot measure anything with accuracy in terms of its speed and position, etc., and momentum. So this is beyond the discussion because it goes into physics. I just wanted to lay the foundation from a scientific perspective that opens the door for the possibility of freedom, of uncertainty, which means also freedom. So from that perspective, it makes total sense and it doesn't contradict any law of physics or law of nature. From the other perspective, when we said that this field of consciousness wants to experience from limited perspectives, then what does it take to experience from limited perspectives? It requires that the limited perspectives are truly themselves. They are limited, because if you force them to be something, then everything is predictable and you don't learn anything or experience anything from this perspective. So you have to allow for any limited perspective to be free to make its choices based on how much it can understand or how much it can act within its perspectives, its vision, its possibilities. And so this is how, putting all of this together, freedom is a necessity for manifestation to happen, for creation to take place. Otherwise, manifestation and creation has no meaning whatsoever for that, paradigm to be complete in itself. And it's very simple. It's not an exception. It's actually a necessity, part of the theorem, part of the corollaries of what the logic of how things happen. Now, what is happening also is, at the same time, as there is greater consciousness in evolution, suppose you have a particle, comes with another particle, becomes an atom, atom becomes a molecule. Now you have more and more complexity, and therefore each of these particles is doing something within its very, very limited perspective. These are very tiny, meager perspectives that has nothing to do with a human perspective, for example. But then a cell is much more complex and has its own perspective, but it's very limited. An organ, a complicated plant, an animal also are complex aspects of consciousness. And they have greater and greater perspectives and greater freedom also. Why? Because when you see more, you have greater ability to choose. And like this, you grow in freedom as you grow in consciousness. What does this mean also? This means that what is really freedom is the ability to choose freely. But if you can only see 3 possibilities in a situation, then of course you are free to choose between one of those 3 possibilities. Suppose your friend has a broader understanding of the situation, and she or he or them, they see 5 possibilities, or another one sees 10 possibilities, because they have broad comprehension, they have greater awareness. They know that this can be done, maybe this, maybe that. So in that case, just simply because they see more, they are aware of more, you can say they have more freedom, because they're not bogged down and condensing their intelligence and their capacity to only 3 choices. Now they can have 10 choices. So just by the mere fact that they have 10 choices, we can say they have greater freedom. And so like this, as you expand your consciousness, you see more possibilities in life, more possibilities in decision making. And literally, this means greater freedom. So freedom grows with higher states of consciousness and with greater awareness.
That's beautiful. Um, okay, so a couple more questions now to wrap up. Where does death sit within this paradigm? Do you fear death yourself, Dr. Nader? And what do you think might happen after death?
Um, I don't fear death for myself. It's a it's a sounds like a pretentious expression, but I feel this for others who work with me, depend on me, family, friends, my work, my mission in life to bring this knowledge that I feel I have to organize and make sure it's going well. And so I feel it's not the time, yet for me to go. And in that sense, yes, I fear this. This is on the intellectual level. I must share an experience, though. Uh, I was once in an earthquake situation, and I was sitting in bed, and then the whole bed was shaking, and I started to see things fall on me from the uh, roof or from the ceiling. I just woke up and it was shaking. I realized it's earthquake, and so I wasn't scared. I just felt okay. All right. I have to go out. Take it easy. So I get dressed and I go out. All the people in the building went out. We were in the garden. We waited, and then things calmed down. So we thought we go back to the room and sleep. And then came aftershocks. When the aftershocks came, as if my consciousness, my awareness, and my more than this, something very intimate within woke up. And now I actually felt great fear. And it was realizing that there is a system within us which is beyond our intellect, which is very instinctive, that actually forces us to protect ourselves, which is almost stronger than your surface value of the intellect. And that is like a survival instinct. And then, because I was kind of playing the calm and the philosopher and all of that, that instinct really shook me to tell me, no, it's not going to work like that. You have to protect yourself. So this is just as an anecdote. But philosophically, uh, there is no true ending after death. This is how I feel. It's ending of just one phase of one's existence, and then one goes on, and one goes on to another phase, and then another phase, until one is fully liberated and one has reached the final experience of totality and wholeness. That is why I believe, and that is personal, in actually reincarnation, that we are getting another chance and another chance until we reach the end of the goal. This is what fits best in the paradigm. And when this question comes up, I also use another metaphor.
Okay.
I usually say, suppose somebody's creating a video game, and it's a shooting video game, and you buy the game and you play the video, and the first time you play it, you get shot and then you lose. So you have to reboot and start over again. And then next time you learn a little more, and this time you don't get shot. Maybe after 10 minutes, maybe after 20 minutes, you reach a more complicated situation and you have to deal with it. And then again, you start over and over again until you kind of realize how it works. And then you are liberated from this whole thing and you completed the game. So my idea is, if there is a creator of life and they create a movie or a video game where the first time you get shot, that's it. You don't play the game, you lose it. I think nobody would want to buy that game. Nobody would want to, you know, be in a game. If you don't want to buy a video game where you start after 2 minutes, you get shot and you're done, and then you can't play it anymore. It's not fun, and it's not the idea. And so I think we are all given chances, and we learn from a life, and then we continue to grow and learn. And life is all about that until we learn the whole thing, the whole story. And transcending is the way to actually know. It's a kind of a cheat thing for the game, because you go directly to the source of the game and you experience it within yourself, and you have a cheat sheet which tells you what's going to happen. And you have then intuition, you have greater perspective, greater vision, and then you can play the game in a better way. Though there are other arguments, which means if you want a philosophical argument in terms of the paradigm itself, we know we have said, every action has a reaction and all of that. So whenever you create an action in your life, you are creating an impact, an impulse, which in terminology of the Vedic terminology, but which everyone knows now, it's called karma. You create a karma. And a karma has a reaction, because everything has to be balanced. And it's part of the original, simplest, aspects of the paradigm, that how can from nothingness you create somethingness, which you alluded to earlier. And that is by creating always the opposite of whatever you disturb. So if you create a little something going up, you have to have something balancing it, so that always the end product of the total universe is nothingness, because everything has its contrary and its opposite. And so if a human being creates all of these dynamics in their life, and so they are responsible for what they have created, and they have to neutralize it. And that is one other logic why one has to continue. And it's not just through death that you get rid of all your issues, or you lose all what you have learned. So both sides, you still come back, and you still recover, and you still deal with what you have to deal with, and enjoy what you have achieved in a previous life.
Wow. Wow. Well, I hope you're right, Dr. Nader. um, with Okay, so a big part of the book focuses on transcendental meditation as a vehicle for expanding consciousness. So, just to finish off, for someone at home listening to this and they want to give TM a try this evening, can you just give them a simple kind of, run through, like, here's how you do it?
You learn TM in 5 steps. One is an introductory step, and that is to know what you expect, and what to learn, why you want to learn. And then you have, including with that step, we can do a preparatory step to know exactly how the instruction will happen. And then there is a personal instruction that happens with a teacher, which is needed for follow-up. The teacher will give you a sound that has no meaning. We call it a mantra. But mantra has been described in many ways as something spiritual or something that has a meaning, etc. But in this case, it's just a sound which has no meaning. And he will teach you, or she will teach you, how to use it, and how to use it. And then from the very first practice, you are already practicing transcendental meditation, which you practice sitting easily and comfortably in a chair. There is no effort required, no change in belief. All of these things we have discussed philosophically. You might agree or disagree, it doesn't matter, because it's a technique. It's a technique that doesn't depend on philosophical understanding. Even children from the age of 5 or 6, they can learn it. They have a special technique until the age of 10. And then from 10 on, they have the sitting, eyes closed technique. And so doesn't require change in belief, change in habits, or even efforts, concentration. It's so easy to do that it really works by itself. It completely works by itself. You just have to learn the steps. And then after that, you have 3 days of verification and discussion about your experience so that you are clear what happens, what you do, what time you meditate, what happens if thoughts come, what kind of thoughts, how does it do, how do you deal with strong thoughts if you have something itching, scratching, etc., and how does it work, the mechanics of it, and where it will uh, guide you, where it will take you, so you understand the meaning of it, the purpose of it, and its significance. And so these are just few lessons after the instruction time. And these few lessons you can also learn with a teacher, but also we have an app that guides you through those steps. So it's very simple. However, you cannot just learn it from a book or for me just saying something here and for you to do it. It really requires personal attention. And it comes from thousands of years tradition of yoga. It's a yoga of the mind rather than yoga of the body, which create that sense of unity between mind and body and behavior and the environment. It's very powerful and has been supported by hundreds of scientific research studies showing its effects on the individual as well as on society, actually. It can improve social situations. So it's very powerful, very sweet, very simple, and very profound technique.
As I was preparing for this, I had the thought, I was like, if there was an organized global daily meditation where we would, obviously in different time zones, but if we met for 15 minutes every day online and we meditated together for 15 or 20 minutes using TM or a similar technique, it would change the world. It would be, so that's maybe something that your organization could aim for. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you
It's
for
a
your
big
thought.
goal.
Thank you. Absolutely. We want to do that, but we have to reach a critical number. And the critical number for changing society has been found to be 1% of the population in any population using this transcendental meditation basic technique, which is powerful. I mean, for it basic, it's very powerful. But there is an advanced technique which is called the city program, where the square root of 1% is enough. And so we're endeavoring to create that phenomenon where the square root of 1% of the people practice this program and preferably together in the same place to create the effect globally. And we've studied this really repeatedly with 116 different scientific research studies to document empirically your beautiful thought. And that has truly created powerful effects in terms of reduction of conflict, even reduction in accidents of the road, reduction in murder, reduction in hospital admissions and infant mortality. So it's really very, very, very powerful effect on society. And thank you for thinking about
Okay. Well, Dr. Nader, where can people find out more about your work online? Where can they get your books? And where would you recommend people to go after this conversation?
the books are found in all major booksellers. For example, Amazon. It is called Consciousness is All There Is by Tony Nader. And I'll be delighted to have you think about it and then maybe discuss it. To learn Transcendental Meditation, we have a website called tm.org, TM for transcendentalmeditation.org. And there you can put your location where you are, and we have teachers all over the country and all over the world, actually. So you can learn in any major city and even sometimes in minor places, depending. So it can be arranged. I have a website called drtonynader.com, which is, just having some news, etc. We have an app, but the app is for those who learn transcendental meditation, and hopefully soon we will make it available for the introductory journey also. So the most practical, simple thing is tm.org to learn transcendental meditation.
Okay. Okay. Well, as we wrap up, it strikes me that you are doing the most important work I think that could be done. And the mission you're on to expand consciousness at scale, I think, is what we most need collectively at the moment. So I just want to wish you the best going forward. And with all of the efforts you're doing, it's just so important. So best of luck, and I hope we can talk again at some point in the future.
I look forward. Thank you very much. It was a joy to be with you.